Have you ever wondered why Brock thinks that rice balls are jelly donuts? Well, today, Internet, we finally have an answer because I interviewed the man responsible for it all. This man is the original English director of Pokemon.
I remember saying to my partner, "Gee, I don't think this is going to last 13 weeks."
But he also voiced over 30 different Pokemon in the original Pokemon dub.
Char, 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 Charmander!
And somehow, I got an interview with this living legend, Michael Haigney, to find out the mystery behind the biggest internet memes in Pokemon history.
Frying pan as a drying pan.
And the greatest Pokemon quote of all time. But since I have zero voice acting experience, I asked the cleverly disguised Silent Chiranui, aka Kingo, to help me out with this interview.
So I guess I'll start off with what was it like being a part of the original 4 Kids dub of Pokemon?
It was like nothing else you could ever imagine. When we first started doing the show, I knew very little about it. I was hired to adapt the script into English and to direct the actors. And I remember getting the first episode where Ash and Misty meet and he gets Pikachu and all sorts of things happen. And I remember saying to my partner Larry, we had a small company that was going to do the localization. I said, "Gee, I don't think this is going to last 13 weeks because it was so different. It was kind of dark and it was, this was not Magilla Gorilla."
How much you got, Gorilla, in the window?
Eventually, and fairly quickly, it became so popular. You had the trading cards and the games, and I would go to work and I would see kids on the train, going to school playing with Pokemon cards. But we were fairly isolated. We would come into work. I would try to adapt the scripts and put in jokes and try to change Japanese puns that didn't make any sense in English, and we would go in the room, and it was just like a machine, just like an assembly line. We were faxing scripts, that's how far back it was. It was kind of a grind. I mean, trying to get the scripts done, trying to stay ahead of the broadcast schedule. It was a challenge.
I thought it was all amazing. And even now, there are people who will go back and watch the show just because, they're told by their parents or other people that the show was really good. And those memes are something that even now people find funny.
The more difficult ones were the ones that were visual puns. And one that comes to mind, I don't know if it's my favorite one, but it was a little bit of a workaround. He says something, and one of the kids says something, and then we go to another, like a separate scene, the kind of imaginary scene, sort of. I don't know what you would call it. And Ash is dressed like a cow. I won't digress. Are there animals in the Pokemon world? When the kids go and have a hamburger, what are they eating? I mean, that's a whole other thing, and that was solved a little bit later by the creators. I'm not sure they even knew themselves. And so I had some joke about, and it's like, how do I do this? All of a sudden he's talking about something, and then all of a sudden he's dressed as a cow. Made no sense. It made sense in Japan, in Japanese, but not. So I made a joke about a Caterpie.
Maybe it's a Caterpie.
This is the best I could come up with. If you can come up with something better and it wasn't like a nasty challenge, please let me know. But at the time, I couldn't. I tried to make it a little bit jokier, I think, in some places than the Japanese. Now, I also hasten to add, maybe I wasn't getting the nuances because I would get a fairly straight translation of just a literal translation. Again, nothing, no such thing. And so I would try to match the flaps, match the mood, and try to gag it up a little bit. And I hope I was successful in that.
Editing sneaky here. Actually, Michael Haigney seems to still not know if he translated the joke correctly and is a little bit worried about it. But I already know what the Japanese joke was from the little bit of Japanese that I happen to know. Here's what happened. Michael Haigney got a script that looked like this, and it said, "Well, Misty, maybe it wasn't a bug, maybe it's a cow." Michael Haigney decides to translate it to a Caterpie, doing the best he can, but actually, that's exactly what the joke was in Japanese. You see, in Japanese, the word for bug is mushi, and the word for cow is ushi. So Caterpie is actually the closest possible translation that Michael Haigney could have done, and he didn't even know it. That's pretty cool. A bit of a follow-up question there. There are two kind of moments or incidents in the Pokemon localization that have become legendary on the internet. I'm
Uh-oh, here it comes. All right, yes. Bring it on.
so the first is there is this moment where Brock says, "I want to use this frying pan as a drying pan."
Hey, I know. I'll use my trusty frying pan as a drying pan.
Yes. Yes. That's right. Yes, I will take credit for that one. I have a daughter who's just graduating from college, and someone she was at school said, "Hey, does he know about that? Hey, I'm going to use this frying pan as a drying pan." I had no idea it was like a meme or a thing.
But that was you. You were the one who did that one?
Yes, yes. He was holding it over there, and also the other thing was, to kind of make it funny or whatever, or make sense. We were just trying, and I also tried to fit the mouth flaps because at that time we were not really editing what we call the flaps, the mouth movements. So try to get those actors, in the Japanese, they do it a different way. They animate the shows first, and then they do the voices. It's not really a value for them to match, but in the US and because of Warner Brothers cartoons and the Disney cartoons and every other studio cartoons, they would animate to the lip flap. So we were used to seeing it very locked, and I felt we kind of had to do that. And but I think you said you're going to ask me about two, and I think I do know what the other one is.
The other one I wanted to ask about, every time we see onigiri, the rice balls, they're referred to as jelly donuts.
Well, okay. Now all right. My memory of this was that there was one episode in which Brock and Ash, they're eating, I think at a Pokemon Center, I can't remember. And there's onigiri. This came up and a million things came up as I was writing the scripts. And I knew it was kind of a rice ball with a piece of seaweed or something. Knew nothing about the history or the meaning of onigiri in Japan. So it's like, what is that? If I say a rice ball, I don't think I could match the flaps.
Mhm.
That's my memory of it, but maybe I'm trying to rationalize what I did. I knew I could. I didn't want to use onigiri because when we were doing this, I thought to have a very specific Japanese thing would not make a lot of sense to kids. So I guess to match the thing, the most that I could think of that it looked like was a jelly donut. Now, my memory of it was that Brock said, "Gee, these jelly donuts are really great," or Ash, I can't remember who it is now.
These donuts are great. Jelly filled are my favorite. Nothing beats a jelly filled donut.
So I don't want to say so I'm not violently corrected by someone. But one of them said, "Gee, these jelly donuts are really great," or whatever. My memory of it was that he said it one time in this one episode. But because this kept coming up in the conventions, I said, let me go back and look at this. So I went on YouTube and it says, "Oh, a jelly donut Pokemon. Oh, look, someone's taken that clip." So I look at the clip. It says, "Gee, it's a little long for that one." That he says it all over jelly donut many times. A lot of mistakes were made. But what I do say about this specific one is, I'm sorry I did it, but I don't regret it. So go figure that out. Because it gives everybody something to talk about when we go to these conventions.
Coming in from the King of Apples, a member of our Discord,
Oh.
who wanted to know which Pokemon was the hardest for you to voice.
Um, you know, as I said, I usually say I did more than 30, but I think it's around 40 or maybe a little bit more. The ones it wasn't that anyone was particularly difficult, but I'm thinking it pops to mind like Charmander. Um, it wasn't really the voice itself, but if there were a lot of attacks, especially at the beginning of the series, because we had to do each individual attack. There'd be a short one, there'd be a long one, there'd be an angry one, there'd be, whatever kind of attack it was. There were multiple in an episode that would get, kind of wearing on the voice. Uh, but then eventually we had a bank of recorded reacts, and so a lot of times we would say, "Okay, this is give me like a 1 second of attack like Charmander or an extra like a 2 second one or whatever, and we would have those banked in there. And Ron London or one of our audio engineers or mixers would pop those in. So I can't say that one particular voice was tough, but it would be the number and the number of attacks.
So every time Ash is like, Charmander, use Ember, you're like, my throat.
Yeah, well, not every time, but like the first three or four or five or six, that can get a little bit much. It shreds your voice a little bit. I'm not a trained actor, so maybe I wasn't coming from the diaphragm properly.
All right, that's cool. Before we get into the segment where maybe you show us how to do a voice or two, Kingo, do you have any more questions for Mike Haigney?
The question is regarding when you voice directed the first Pokemon movie. What was it like to work on just not the script, but with the other voice actors and actresses that came a part of this?
Well, I had worked with them on the series. Jay Getty, believe, was the voice of Mewtwo. So I hadn't worked with Jay before, but all the other actors I had worked with in the series, we it was different because for this we recorded the movie at like a big not a soundstage exactly, but a big recording studio wherever they were projecting it in the famous Brill building, which had been the headquarters for a lot of songwriters and record companies, especially in the late 50s and early 60s and beyond. So that was fun to be working in the Brill building on Broadway in New York and then this big stage and everything. But, these were people who were used to doing tons of voices. And we had Veronica Taylor, who was Ash, and Eric Stewart, who did multiple roles, as did Rachel Lillis, who sadly died very recently. Um, and we would hire the actors so that they could do multiple roles, so it was better for them because they got paid more. It was better for us because they had more incentive to stay. Sometimes early in the series, we had a couple of actors whom we had to replace because they got other jobs and they were maybe only doing one or two roles. But Eric was Brock. He was the voice of Brock. He was the voice of eventually of James and Squirtle and a whole bunch of Pokemon. And Rachel was both Misty and Jessie, and then Jigglypuff and a whole and other roles as well. So they were always professional and great to work with.
I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are.
The Mewtwo movie was the first Pokemon movie, and so it was really a big deal. And on that script, I worked with the president of 4Kids, Norman Grossfeld, and also with John Toohey, who had written and was involved with a lot of the Pokemon episodes and then other shows that I worked on with him at 4Kids. But my recollection is that I did write that line. And, it was lucky in the sense that Mewtwo didn't have flaps, but we had a timing in there. And, that was an important part and the message of the movie. So other people may have different recollections. I do remember writing that line.
Toshibinya asks, what is your favorite Pokemon, and would you like to do them? Would you like to voice them?
I think my favorite is to do, the voice to do is Psyduck. Psyduck, 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 Psyduck. Because he has a range of emotions. He can be angry, sigh, or he can be quizzical, sigh. I can identify with Psyduck, and I guess he's my favorite voice. I think that the Japanese creators did a really great job. It was a nice show. Ash as the protagonist he was sort of like a regular kid. He would get angry, he would do foolish things, he would get emotional and do things out of, spite, not spite, but emotion, and he would make mistakes and he would lose battles. I think that was a very important aspect of the series, that he wasn't always the hero, he wasn't Superman. The infighting with Misty and to a certain extent with Brock and Brock's peccadillos and Misty's feistiness. I think that kids could identify with that. And the show came to us as a real solid show, as a real solid base with those personal relationships and their travels. And so, You know, that was like the Christmas tree, and I was maybe putting a little tinsel on it once in a while to kind of add a little extra sparkle, but there was a lot there to begin with.
This interview took over 2 months to edit, so if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate leaving a like or hitting the subscribe button. Also, if you'd like to hear more from Michael Haigney, I'll be doing a part 2, where Michael Haigney will be teaching us how to voice Psyduck as well as other Pokemon. And if you want to learn more about the original Pokemon series, check out their podcast, Original Pokemon. Pokemon was a huge part of my childhood, and doing this interview was one of the most special moments of my entire life. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'll catch you around.